Good afternoon or good evening, Council. Jason Fairbrush, Public Transportation and Parking Director. Pleased to present the FY21 proposed budget to you, and I will get it set up here just in a minute. Which is what I want right there, right? Does that share anything?
No. Go ahead and click share over there. And now click play.
There we go. How's that?
It works.
Okay, great. Well, I'll start the presentation this morning really by just saying, without a doubt, we are operating in a very challenging environment for transit right now. Of course, we're coupling that with a pretty difficult budget year. But I thought it would be a good opportunity just to remind Council that, we are still focused on long-term strategic objectives, just like any successful organization would be. And the one that we are certainly focused on is Council's priority to develop a transportation system that works for all residents. So the way we have our presentation set up this morning is we would like to take a look, or this afternoon, is to spend just a little time looking at how we've used some of the resources to continue to enhance our public transit system. We'll take an optimistic look forward, and then we'll spend a little bit of time talking about some of the short-term adjustments that we're going to have to make in order to preserve service during the next budget year. So one of the things I wanted to mention in terms of using resources to improve the public transit system is I want to really have an opportunity to talk about bus shelters. This year we set a very aggressive goal for ourselves in adding 100 new bus shelters to our public transit system. If you'll recall, several years ago we started improving bus shelters. We started with a legacy number of shelters of about 67, incrementally doubled that number. But this year, our goal was 100 new bus shelters. We've currently installed 75, and we are anticipating to be able to install the remaining 25 within this last 30 days, or just shortly after the start of the new fiscal year. We have all the concrete pads in place, so it's really just a matter of assembling the shelters themselves. And we really could not have done this without the assistance of Public Works and the planning department. Public Works does a tremendous job helping us get the concrete out in the right of way. Planning's contributions in the areas of identifying public transit priority areas and pedestrian priorities in our areas in our city have been super helpful. And so again, lastly, just to give you a little bit of context, 100 new shelters is about a 55% increase in the total number of shelters we have in our system. We still have a long way to go, but that puts us at about 281 system-wide. The other infrastructure piece I wanted to mention was our CNG fueling facility. Switching over to alternative fuels is a initiative of our COPTA Board of Trustees. Certainly promotes Council's priority to develop a better transportation system, if for no other reason than air quality and the fact that the CNG buses, they move along the city streets. They're much quieter than the diesel buses. But the CNG fueling facility also has a very practical financial benefit for us, particularly, and the timing is really well, particularly for this year, in that we were able to cut $140,000 from our fuel budget, which is about a 9% reduction, because we're able to buy more CNG directly from O&G or a third-party supplier. So again, a pretty practical benefit there. The other thing I wanted to touch on was technology enhancements. We have a lot of technology that we use on a day-to-day basis to manage our system. It's a challenge to keep that maintained. So we're always excited when we're able to launch something new, especially something new that impacts our level of customer service. And so what you see on the slide here is an example of our real-time streetcar locator. So a customer can now, from our website, access this map that you see on the right-hand side of your slide and actually watch for the streetcar arriving at their stops. They can see the streetcars move around the loops, and we've all been out there on the platform waiting to catch the streetcar. It's great to have the estimated arrival times, but when you can actually see that streetcar on the map, virtually making some progress along the route, for some reason it just seems to make that wait go a little bit faster. So really glad to have that available to our customers. Quick update on the convention center parking garage. This is an 1,100 space, 6.5 story parking structure that will support the convention center, the Omni Hotel, Scissortail Park, Chesapeake Arena, various other businesses in that part of downtown. And just an update for council that we are on schedule to have the garage substantially completed in November of this year, and then anticipating final completion in December. So regardless of the current state of emergency that we're in, construction on the garage has progressed very nicely. And then just kind of finishing up, the discussion of using resources and promoting transit within this last year. I wanted to just finish talking about partnership and collaboration. And so one of the things we brought online in this last year was Embark Norman. So Embark is providing the bus service for the city of Norman. The benefit to that, of course, is a more seamless transportation system between the two communities. Certainly allows people from Norman, ideally, to get to Oklahoma City more seamlessly than if we were operating two systems. And we do deliver that service with a full cost recovery model, plus an administrative fee that we pass along to the city there for some overhead. So again, another practical benefit financially is some additional revenue that we're able to generate and put into our local system. The other thing I wanted to mention was the grocery shuttle. We were fortunate enough to be able to participate and coordinate some temporary transportation in Northeast Oklahoma City in this last year in developing a grocery shuttle. Many community partners came to the table there, primarily churches that had transportation assets available. OU Medical was a big contributor to the success of that shuttle. We ended up allocating some assets to provide that transportation. And so really we provided the coordination of those transportation services with all those community partners stepping up. And then the last piece here is really just a mention of the RTA. As you know, COTPA is under an administrative agreement with the Regional Transit Authority of Central Oklahoma. We are providing the staff support for this entity, and as you know, this is an independent transit authority comprised of 6 cities in the metro area, really governed by a board of directors, and 2 of those board of directors are appointed and do come from the city of Oklahoma City. So certainly puts the city of Oklahoma City in a unique position and I think perspective on long-term transit planning in Oklahoma City. So as we kind of shift into looking forward, one of the things I did, again, want to take the opportunity to mention is just, how proud I am of our employees over the last several months. Their ability to demonstrate the resiliency of our system, coming to work every day, providing essential transportation service for essential purpose. We have not missed a day of transit since the initial state of emergency, and I'm happy to report that this Sunday, June 7th, we will be resuming our normal service hours and our normal service span. Now, we're going to still conduct business a little bit differently to protect our employees and our customers, but we will be returning to normal frequency and service span, which I think our customer base is certainly looking forward to based on recent increases in ridership. Looking forward to a couple of other opportunities. Again, with MAPS 4, we have potential for more improvements to the bus system, particularly bus stop upgrades. We are continuing to work on the Northwest Bus Rapid Transit Project. Our consultant, HNTB, they continue to work actively with us, planning, Public Works. They're currently in the preliminary design phase of that project. And then as we move forward, we'll be looking at future transit plans. Just like the 2005 fixed guideway study has served us this last 10 to 15 years, we'll need to update those plans so we have a good trajectory moving forward. So in looking at adjustments to the current year budget, again, with the idea of trying to preserve service, I direct your attention to pages C73 through C76 of the city budget book, and also take this opportunity to remind council that the budget book will just have the portion of funding that comes from primarily the city's general fund to support public transit. The slides that I'm going to cover with council is the entire COTPA budget. So that's the entire amount of resources that will be used to provide public transportation and parking services in the coming year. So with the idea of trying to preserve service, knowing that we needed to find some efficiencies within our budget this year, there are a few major changes that I would like to mention to council. One is some temporary service changes. As I mentioned, we really did everything we could to preserve our essential transit services. However, some of our alternative transit modes, such as the Oklahoma River cruises and our Spokies bike share operation, we are proposing that we temporarily suspend those services for the next fiscal year. By doing so, that will generate about $673,000 worth of savings to the general fund. Another change that we have proposed really has to do with restructuring some of our staffing, reducing some of our line items in our bus parts and fuel budget, and that saves us about $463,000 in the fiscal year. Again, general fund money there. And then the most significant change that we're looking at for our budget is a reduction to the general fund transfer that's used to support bus service of about $9 million. And that reduction in the general fund transfer will be offset by federal CARES Act funding. And this federal CARES Act funding that we'll be using to offset that general fund reduction, we will be able to use it to reimburse for operational costs. And that CARES Act funding is completely separate from the apportionment that went to the city directly. I believe Assistant City Manager Soodle spoke about that during the last council meeting. This funding that I'm speaking about today is completely separate from that. So we're able to leverage that CARES funding to be able to continue to preserve bus service. And so this slide here will give you really a look at kind of how our budget has changed between the two fiscal years. And we'll start with the total budget for 2021 of $43.7 million. That's about a 2.8%. That's about a $2.8 million decrease, or about a 6.2% overall reduction in the budget. Then on the same slide in the middle section, we have each of our services broke down in the corresponding budgets. And you can see that pretty much every service line there, except for bus, did see a budget reduction. But bus service budget is relatively flat. I mean, it's about $100,000 more than what it was in 2020. Streetcars down 1.9%. I've already mentioned the significant reductions in service to the ferry service and Spokies. Parking, which is this is our off-street parking budget, which is supported by the revenues of the system. We are projecting about a 20% decline on the parking system. And then the bottom line there, Norman, I know that's not related to the city budget at all, but it does comprise the entire COTPA budget. You'll see a decline there of about 19%. And just as an information item, that's really reducing the budget to align with what the normal operating costs are. The first year, we had a lot of one-time startup expenses. So if anybody is curious about the Norman service, there is no reductions planned for that. And then the bottom line of this table will just give you an idea of what our general fund transfer is looking like for 2021 compared to 2020. So with the reductions that I had mentioned on the major changes slide, with ferry service and Spokies, and then some of the staff reallocations, along with the CARES Act funding, we're able to reduce the general fund transfer to about $13.7 million. So that's about a 41% decline in that general fund transfer from the previous year. And then looking at the overall COTFA budget in more traditional way that we typically share it with council, this is again that $43.7 million overall COTFA budget, but divided up really by different type of service. So you can see, no surprise, the majority of the budget is the bus service at $33.5 million or 77%. Streetcar makes up $5.3 million of the overall budget or 12%. Parking at 4.6 or 11, and then minimal amounts for the ferry service and the bike share, at least for 2021. And again, we have that proposed as a one-year suspension of that service. I have 2 slides left for you, and these will get into the funding sources for the different operations. And again, as mentioned, the off-street parking system does not rely on any general fund revenue. It's all, basically we pay our expenses from the revenue that the system generates. Our largest share of revenue continues to be monthly contract parkers at about 54% of the overall revenue, or $2.5 million. Event parking, we have making up 27% of the revenues, or about $1.2 million. Our daily transient revenue is about 16% of the revenue, or $725,000. And again, thinking back to, I think it was 2 slides ago, our overall revenues in our parking system are projected to be down by about 20%. And a lot of that is attributable to expected reduction in event revenue and some reduction in our monthly contracted revenue. And then finishing up, talk about the funding sources for public transportation. And again, this graph here has changed considerably from what we typically present to council. Generally, you'll see over half of the funding for transportation coming from the city's general fund. With the 2021 proposed budget, it's actually about 35%, or again, $13.7 million. We have federal funds from the CARES Act of about $9 million, and then our typical federal operating dollars that we get of about 7.3, making up 19% of, I'm sorry, the CARES Act makes up 23% of the budget, whereas the typical federal funds that we receive make up 19%. And then you can follow the other revenue sources down, with Norman bringing in 2.9, our fare revenue at 2.7, and we have adjusted that for anticipated reductions in ridership. I am pleased to report, though, that our state funding level remained unchanged, so we're receiving about $1 million from the state. So that's the overall funding sources for public transportation, and I believe that is really the last slide I have for you this evening, and I'm glad to answer any questions.
Jason, just a couple of quick questions. I know it's late. C75 of your report, under summary of expenditures by purpose, capital expenditures. In 2019, we had 0 capital expenditures. In 21, we're going to get a 123,575. Can you kind of describe what that expenditure is for? That's the first question. The second question is, at A7, the city manager report, there's a discussion about this CARES Act money, the $9 million that's going to help us preserve our general fund. That's good for this budget, but I'm wondering about the next budget. And if you could explain that, what our thoughts are on that. We just have to return to the general fund to the tune of about $55 million.
I missed the very last part of the question, Councilman. I'm sorry. What did you say about $55 million?
If we don't get the $9 million, we just get the $9 million as a one-time grant to us. Then that means the general fund the following year, if we don't get any more CARES funds, would be about a $55 million expenditure out of the general fund.
So okay, all right, I got it. So The first question, page C75 on the capital expenditures. You know, for our budget, you're not going to see a lot of capital expenditures on the city side because about the only capital projects we run through the city's budget as opposed to the COTFA budget are capital expenditures related to the on-street parking system. Right. And I can tell you that for FY20, we did have $123,000 budgeted. That's for this current year, of course. That was an anticipation of not only maintaining our existing meters, but also the thought of implementing some of the recommendations from the parking study that, you know, of course, have been put on hold for the time being. And then the carryover, the same number, the same amount of capital expenditures that you see in FY21 is really just a function of not having the full capital improvement budget for on-street parking complete at the time the proposed budget book was put together. And so we do expect some capital expenditures. Again, it seemed to make sense, at least at this time, to carry it over, knowing we really didn't get to implement the parking study in 20, but hopefully we'll be able to do that in 21. And then with regards to the CARES funding, you're absolutely right. The way I see the CARES funding is really what it does is it buys us some time. Hopefully it buys us time to be able to preserve our service levels in anticipation of the economy recovering. And when I say it buys us time, our apportionment for CARES funding was actually right around $24 million. And so working with the COPA Board of Trustees and Finance Committee, what we have looked at in terms of trying to stretch those dollars out is draw some of that operating CARES money for this year to give the general fund some relief in the current fiscal year, program about $9 million of that for 21, and then we should have about another $9 million that we could put towards 22, and that should give us about a $3 million cushion, let's say, for anything, you know, the unexpected that comes up. So really what we're looking to do is try to leverage that CARES funding for the next 2 years with the idea of hopefully the economy being able to rebound. But to your point, at some point in time, if we don't slowly, you know, if we don't start building that general fund transfer back up to, you know, more traditional levels, which I believe was around 23 million last year, or this year, I should say, then we're going to have, then we could potentially have to look at some service reductions. The fact is, then they would be delayed.
But the good thing is in 2022, we're not going to have to tap the general fund because we're going to have an additional $9 million sitting there from the CARES.
Yes. So for the next 2 fiscal years, yes, we believe we are covered.
Jason, great report. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
This is Councilman Hammond. I'm curious if you know, I saw recently that Tulsa Transit, it looks like, is using some of their CARES funding to provide, I think they're calling them hero bonuses to their frontline employees. And I was just curious if we have any opportunity to do something like that. I know we kind of connected about the hard work that your staff have been doing throughout the pandemic, and last week during our was that last week or I don't know when, but last week or the week before during the virtual town hall that a few of us hosted. But, you know, I think, you know, to the point of just, you know, getting to hear from 2 of those staff members who have been on the front lines and hearing, you know, their anxiety, but that they were just powering through it and wanted to still provide the best service to get folks to their most essential needs during this time. I'm just curious if there's any opportunity to use that funding to do that.
There is opportunity for that. And in fact, we just finished up our collective bargaining agreement with our transit union. In fact, we plan to present it to the COTFA Board of Trustees for consideration this Friday. And part of that collective bargaining agreement does provide for additional premium slash incentive pay during the state of emergency. So it's not so much structured as a bonus, but it is an additional amount added to their hourly rate. And that's really something that, you mentioned Tulsa, but that's something that, the transit industry is seeing across the country. So it's certainly not uncommon or an outlier for us. And it is true. I mean, you heard from our employees, they're showing up and going to work every day, just like many other essential city workers. So.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah. And I actually, to the point of that, many transit unions across the country are calling for that hazard pay. I know I got to sit in on a webinar with a few different entities from across the country that were discussing with very, local elected officials from across the country, opportunities to make sure that our transit workers were taken care of. So I'm glad to hear that's been in the air for you. I guess I'll just take this last opportunity to draw back that connection between getting people to their needs and the reduction of violent crime. Going back to what I mentioned before, one of the drivers of violent crime is an inability to meet one's economic needs. And I think I would just editorialize on that to add the burden of being able to meet one's economic needs. So it's not just, great, I got a job. And who knows, it probably doesn't pay, if it pays minimum wage, it's not a living wage in the state. But in addition, I have to figure out how to get there. And if I don't have a car and I live in a city that is 621 square miles, the way that we have underfunded our bus service creates a huge burden on so many people to get across the city. And I have two anecdotes to tell from actually one bus trip that I took. It was actually while I was still running for office. I was invited to go tour Paycom and meet with them. So because I don't have a car, I looked at what an Uber ride and I was like, well, can't afford that. So I'm taking the bus. So I took the number 5 up to the end of the line, which is, I believe, Mercy Hospital, and biked the rest of the way to Paycom. On the way there, the bus was actually a little bit late. And there was a woman who hadn't taken the bus very often, it sounded like, when she was asked, because she was asking me certain questions, or she hadn't taken this route, I suppose, very often, because she was asking me some questions about, is this the best bus to take to get to XYZ? And it turned out that she was trying to get to a visitation visit with her daughter at Penn Square Mall. And the bus that drops folks off right outside of Penn Square Mall had just left. So it was gonna be another 30 minutes. And so I said, this one it's a little bit of a walk across a few parking lots, but if you get off right at Belle Isle, you can get there. Unfortunately, the bus was a little bit late, and in just every single minute, the panic that she was experiencing about getting to that visit and making sure that she met her obligations in visitation to be able to get her daughter back. I don't know what the situation was for why her daughter was in DHS custody, but 15-minute service, doesn't necessarily doesn't mean that things happen. There are delays for various reasons, but if that other bus that could have gotten her to Penn Square Mall was going to be 15 minutes, it might not have felt like such a panicked experience for her, because the bus that we were taking was quite a bit late. I think it was actually 30 minutes late. So it was one sort of shift of taking the bus behind. And everybody on that bus, because she kept asking questions, she was asking the operator, everyone was rooting for her. And and trying to help her get there as quickly as possible to that food court at Penn Square Mall. On the way back, I biked back to Mercy and waited for the bus, and a gentleman came walking down, I guess that's Kilpatrick Turnpike, no sidewalks. It was like sprinkling a little bit because it was December. And he was really friendly and started chatting. And he asked me, you know, what I was up to. And I said, oh, I just got done with a meeting and I'm headed back downtown. And I asked him what he was doing. He's like, oh, I just got off work. And he works at a new donut place that was out on Kilpatrick. His bus ride to get to his job, to try to meet the obligations that he had for his family, was a 3-hour trip one way. Because he lives on the south side, so he takes the bus downtown, transfers, and takes that ride up to Mercy and then walks. And for somebody who might already experience a myriad of barriers, you know, I could imagine how frustrating that must be. And he had a great attitude about it. He had a better attitude than I would have ever had about it. But for countless others for who the underfunding of our public transit system is failing in that same way, you know, it seems like it might just be easier to do something different. And those are the sorts of stories and factors that feed that cycle that I talked about. So I want it, everything connects. Nothing is in a vacuum. And I don't think we should ever consider or think about our budget in any other way, because it's not an isolated incident or isolated issue that all of the, again, those social ills are so bad in our state. And when you look at our funding priorities, they're so lopsided. And it's not a mistake. They connect, and we have to keep talking about how they connect. And I want to always commend Embark. You all do an amazing job with the resources you have. And I want to give you more because I know that you all are great stewards of the money that you oversee, and you really make, you really squeeze every single bit out of that to really serve, really truly protect and serve the residents of the city by connecting them to what they need. So I want to thank you.
Thank you.
So to echo Councilperson Hammond, Jason, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I just really appreciate the work you and our Embark team do. It's been an honor to serve as a COPPA trustee since 2015. If Mick Cornett is listening or watching, just thank you for your faith in me when you appointed me to this position, and now I have the honor of serving on council. I suspect this comment is really more for Craig and maybe the other council members. And you've heard me say it before, but maybe not within the context of the discussions we had today. I'm having a really tough time with the budget this year. I know we all are. I recognize that. But there's something about today that just crystallized it. As you might recall, during the MAPS discussions last summer and throughout the entirety of my campaign, I asked us to consider taking a piece of MAPS, still calling it MAPS, but to take a piece of that penny sales tax and put it toward a dedicated sales tax for our public transit system. And I recognize that in the next few years, we are going to go to our people and we're going to ask them in an election for regional transit authority about light rail connecting our city to our city through light rail to Edmond, Moore, Norman, and then expanding the streetcar through Dale City to Tinker. And I am a major supporter of that. I will knock every door I can for that. And that in part of my discussions last year with staff and the mayor and with the city manager was that in that upcoming election, we would have a conversation about that dedicated tax, including for our city, maybe as a separate vote, but a dedicated transit tax. And again, I will knock you won't even know how many doors I will knock for that. You don't even know, I don't even know. But I'm having a hard time with this budget right now because it's just becoming clearer and clearer to me that I don't know how much longer we can keep asking people to wait for this. And you all know this history pretty well, but I mean, we're talking starting in the 60s, or really the 50s, just the tearing up of the streetcar that used to connect Ward 2 to Ward 6 to downtown, Todd's Ward. I mean, that streetcar connected our people to their basic needs once upon a time. Was it perfect? No. Could we have improved upon it? Absolutely. That's what a more perfect union looks like. Instead, we've had to kind of start from scratch. And we stopped funding our bus system. And those decades of decreasing the funding conditioned our people away from using the bus. And moreover, some not good actors once upon a time started stigmatizing the bus. They started making the case that the bus was a dangerous place, that, quote, those people use it, which was code for homeless people, code for Black and brown people, code for people in the urban core of the city. That's true. That's not my opinion. And thank the Lord for the last couple decades where the people who are in the city, the people who've stayed that all through those decades of disinvestment in our parks and our bus system and all the core services, thank the Lord that they understand what needs doing. Thank the Lord for the people who've moved back into the city and or from other cities outside of Oklahoma here who understand that connecting people to their basic needs is a core service. And I'm really happy that the mayor has been talking about transit as a core service over the last couple of years. But that core service can only truly function if it runs every 15 minutes. It should not have taken that gentleman that Councilperson Hammond is talking about 3 hours to get someplace because they have to move from this place to that place, connect over here, over there. And I have zero respect for these arguments I sometimes hear where we say, well, why fund the buses if people aren't riding them? That is to completely ignore the history of why we stopped funding public transit in the first place. This isn't right. This is not right. And it's not Embark's fault. It's not the current city manager's fault, but it is in our past and it brought us to the present. And we know through best practices how to get us to our future. So I'm having just a really hard time with the budget this year, especially when it comes to transit. I just am. And I'm a very patient person. I'm ready to go knock those doors for RTA, but I'm just having a hard time. I'm having a really hard time. Thank goodness for the CARES Act, to Councilperson Stonecipher's concerns. And yeah, I get it, we're moving towards 7 o'clock, but I would again remind everybody, we disinvested in the 1950s and 60s. So what is a few more minutes to talk about this is kind of how I feel. And I just really want us to think about that. I really, really want us to think about that. And I want us to think about where in our budget we can look to reallocate some of these funds in the interim, and where routes exist right now that we can increase those frequencies. And as we move through maps for sales tax collection, but y'all, there is a reason why not as many riders use the bus. But even beyond that, and I meant to bring this up earlier, but so much needed saying. This is from NPR about COVID. Quote, in April, New Orleans health officials, really hear me on this. New Orleans health officials realized their drive-through testing strategy for the coronavirus wasn't working. The reason? Census tract data revealed hotspots for the virus were located in predominantly low-income African-American neighborhoods where many residents lacked cars. And so now they're having to rethink their approach to testing. They're having to do mobile testing vans. And then when you look at the wealth disparity in our country, where you have, this is from Forbes, that in 2016, the last year for where we have data on the median income, median Black wealth was at $17,100. Again, the median Black wealth was $17,100, while that of white households was $170,180, a ratio of 10-to-1 in favor of white households. Now I'm biracial. I'm not prejudiced. I'm not racist. This is not an anti-anyone statement. This is a statement though. And when your median income is $17,100, what car? What car payment? What insurance? What maintenance are you doing on that car? And that's why we see so many of our folk in our Black community relying on the bus to get them where they're going. What happens when it's late? Not because of Embark's fault. What happens when they have to make all these different change overs? I hope y'all are hearing me on this, because this is what makes it hard for me sometimes to sleep at night. It's what's made this last week very, very hard. So I feel like we're doing everything and moving in the right direction, but I think we need it to be quicker. So again, I applaud Embark and where we are, but I really need us to be thinking about what we can be doing to at least increase frequency on the routes that have the highest employment opportunities for our people. And better connecting people more frequently to those services. So again, proud to be a COPPA trustee, honored to serve on city council, but I have to raise these issues. So, also, I'm worried about Spokies. I'm worried about those bikes going. I'm really worried about that. I see them out there right now. I just worry about that. So thank you for listening to that.
Any other Councilwoman Nice?
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you for the presentation, and I know it's been a challenge for you all, especially with the pandemic and getting our riders and our residents where they need to go, and just being able to be of service, especially during the food insecurity that we're facing in our community. So I just want to emphasize my personal thanks for you all. To continuously say yes. And I know obviously a lot of our residents may not realize that opportunity to get a ride to a store is still available, even though it's still not, it may not be enough for some, but we are able to offer that service. So I thank you for continuing to be able to do that. So I want to continue whatever I can to assist in getting information and resources for you all, and connect our community with it as well. So again, I just want to personally say thank you for that.
Jason, thank you for the presentation, and thank you, sir, for your efforts and those of your staff as well. We really do appreciate it.
I agree. Thank you.
With that, we will move to item 5, citizens to be heard. We had one signed up. Unfortunately, he dropped off a while ago. So we will move on to item 6, which is adjournment, and we are adjourned.